Hopefully you can all see the slides up on the screen. I can see them, so that's a good start. So our speaker today is Anna Feigenbaum. Have I said that right, Anna?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay, great.
after 12 years, Pippa.
I'm not sure I said your right. So Anna is a professor in digital storytelling here at Bournemouth University, and for another couple of months at least. She's also co-director of the Centre for Science, Health and Data Communication Research, which is the centre that this speaker series is run by. Um, and she's going to be talking to us about using AI to build a database from below. And she tells me that she's got a bio slide within the talk, so I'll let her tell you all about herself. Over to you, Anna.
Great. All right. Thank you guys who showed up. Now we have our union meeting at the same time as this. So it's a strange time, of course, for HE in general, and a particularly strange time to be giving a talk, trying to stay optimistic about higher education and the work that we do, while also feeling a lot of deep solidarity for colleagues. Thank you all for coming. I'm actually at the University of Glasgow, which is where I am moving, and I'm accustomizing myself to the local beverage as we speak. So this project comes out of a work that I've been doing for a number of years now, mostly with humanitarian organizations, looking at different ways that you can do investigative and digital methods for kind of accumulating data on subjects where there's either not a lot of data because it's strategically hidden or not a lot of data because it's not well recorded, whether that's some of those are for intentional reasons and some of those are because some data is difficult to record. So I'll talk a little bit about that as we go. A lot of the approaches that are here are captured in the data storytelling workbook. And that is kind of up to the kind of 2020 of what I was up to. And this is kind of a post 2020, what do we do now with different AI tools, kind of iteration of some of the stuff that I've been working on for a long time. So the project I'm going to talk about specifically, though I am also with Kaylin, who's on the call, doing another project with another team that's also using similar AI technologies. But this project is funded by the British Academy, and you can see my various co-Is and the postdoc who's done most of this work below. So this is very much a group endeavor, and we're also partnered to an NGO called Omega, who studies less lethal weapons and police use of force. So my work package on this project was to think about how we would redesign a database that captured some of the problems that currently exist in the ways that we record police use of force violations at protests. So I'll take you through sort of just in kind of broad strokes what that is. If anyone on the call is an expert in kind of police use of force or that kind of thing, I'm happy to answer more specific questions, but I'm going to give kind of the focus of this is more on the database and AI questions than on the issue of police use of force, though happy to talk about that as well. So the first thing that we did was what we called a database audit, where we went through, and I say we, but largely the postdoc, Dr. Daniel Elder, went through different existing databases of different sizes. So some of them huge, like ACLED, which has all kinds of like machine learning tech that it uses in like whole teams and big grants, and some really small and done by small teams of researchers, things like Bellingcat, which is with forensic architecture, which is a kind of more academic sized project. And then the riots in the UK is our PI's project, and that was just him and an RA. So really different kinds of scales of databases and database teams and projects. And we went through them and we looked at kind of how they did their recording, and particularly focusing on questions of police use of force, which is not necessarily the point of all of the databases, but data that they capture. So no need to read all of this, but just to give you a sense of what I mean by a database audit, this is a kind of summary of what we found in the audit. And so we were looking at differences between the purpose of these databases, the types of data they have, the scopes of coverage, and so forth. And so this audit then was able to inform a kind of summary takeaways to help us figure out how we wanted to build the prototype. that we were doing. And importantly, we're just building a prototype. This isn't a massive grant. So this is a conceptual database more so than a functional database. So what we found were the key takeaways were that most databases had limited or no systematic tracking of police violence, repression tactics, or protest police interactions. Most of them did not track the strategies beyond broad event descriptions. So it's really hard to find out information about actual riot control tactics. And the problem with that is that if you don't know or have documentation of what tactics the police use, it's really hard to understand whether or not they were violating various human rights principles and protocols around the rights to protest. So in general, this is a kind of ongoing problem that we don't have good detailed data on the ways that police mobilize and make decisions about use of force. So very few databases provided any verifiable evidence of police misconduct. Usually they rely on secondary sources. And these are some exceptions to that are things like more investigative journalism projects like Bellingcat. Citizen-generated data often fills then the critical gaps in police accountability, but often lacks systematic data collection training. So you have these wonderful projects done by investigative journalists, but and sometimes by data journalists, so people who do have data skills, but they're thinking very differently than someone who is a human rights monitor, and they're thinking very differently than someone who is like a quant political scientist that wants, so these databases have different motivations, and therefore they capture and structure data in very different ways. So I'll just that's the kind of background context of why that is important. You can let me do side arrow here. There we go. So one of the big problems with data on police violence, but this is also true of any kind of most kinds of humanitarian cause data and things having to do with war, refugees, anytime we have something where people are not, where there's an impetus to not kind of systematically monitor or count. So rubbish in, rubbish out, something we say a lot about data. So you put bad data into a database or you train an AI with bad data, you're going to get bad output. And so Stinson, who's one of the biggest academics who's done projects on police misconduct, argues that traditional sources of data and methods of study, whether official statistics, self-reports, surveys, or direct observations, either do not exist or in any usable format or are ill-equipped to identify, count, or provide the basis for empirical analysis of instances in which police perpetuate crimes themselves, right? So the problem is either things are not counted, or where they are counted, they're not counted in a way where the data is usable for accountability, so for legal or humanitarian intervention. And this is something that we talk about as the no data problem in the data storytelling workbook. And for less lethal weapons, even more so than for things like gun violence by police, there is absolutely no policy to systematically record or report these use of force violations. So obviously, if there's no requirement to report data, you're not going to have a lot of data reported. And so my interest in this that I worked on for many years around tear gas came from this idea that we just did not know. We just did not have the ability to count. And the implications of that. So the kind of takeaways from this audit that informed our approach to creating our database was this issue of limited or no systematic tracking of police violence. So in response to that, we wanted to bring together the scattered reports that do exist, and we wanted to use existing protocols, so where these kind of frameworks do exist, in order to better code, so to better label and capture and be able to aggregate evidence. So I realize that if you're not a database person and you're listening to this, some of this might be a bit techie speak, but please, in the Q&A, do feel free to ask any questions on this. So the second thing is they don't track strategies beyond broad event descriptions. So you wouldn't get these kind of records of actually how police force was mobilized. So again, we wanted to bring together reports that talk about this. They rely on secondary sources without field validation. So databases that are relying on media reports rather than going to the original source. And so we wanted to prioritize reports from organizations that actually have kind of personal testimony and have kind of human-based evidence. So it's not mediated through journalism. And then they lack the systematic data collection, and this is a bit outside of the scope of our project, but part of my broader work, which is about training people and creating open educational resources to train people to do better collection of police use of force. Our little bar is right in front of my arrow I want. So one of the things that's been happening more broadly, and again, if you're a police person in the room, happy to talk about this in more detail later, is that we've moved from what I talk about in terms of moving from cop watching to data aggregation as a form of cop watching. So this has largely happened through data journalism and investigative journalist projects and citizen-led journalism or citizen-led investigations, where people use things like Google Sheets to collectively record instances of violence in order to be able to produce some kind of statistics. And these numbers and statistics will be wrong, but they will be better than no data. So wrong data, I always say, in this kind of area is better than no data, because otherwise we have no ability to aggregate, to think about things as kind of collective evidence. So these new data aggregation practices have led to something that I call hybrid data architectures, and this is largely informed by Jonathan Gray's work. So news reports used to aggregate incident data where agencies don't systematically record or report their own data. So this is kind of the Bellingcat, the investigative journalists, these projects, the fatal encounters, these projects that have been going on. Then you kind of layer that with data that comes from police reports, medical reports, and other verification processes. So one of the things we're drawing a lot on is like if there is an inquiry or an investigation, we can use those reports as well. And then official databases emerge that are kind of hybrids of these citizen-generated data of work done by data and investigative journalism and of what we might think of as more official record keeping. And so these are kind of blending or being brought together in kind of interesting ways. And so we wanted to start from this as being the present of data aggregation at the moment, and think about what a database might look like if it was intentionally starting from this concept of a hybrid data architecture. So we're seeing these ranges of sources that do exist as legitimate and verifiable bits of information that we can then pull together evidence from and verify kind of evidence against. So this leads us to two things. One, a more traditional method. For anyone who's done a content analysis, this is a coding framework that's very similar to what you would do if you were doing content analysis. And this is something else I've been working on, is kind of thinking about how we take traditional forms of media content analysis and we turn them into a kind of folksonomies that allow us to build databases so that we're making our research more public. So here, I'm just going to let someone in. So what we did here is just create codes for things that weren't already captured. So this issue of like not having a lot of details on the police and the weapons used and the types of events and the strategies, we created codes for those based on existing humanitarian frameworks, and our NGO partner was very helpful, did most of this work, and then we kind of
Has Anna frozen for everybody else?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, she has, unfortunately.
We will just hope that she comes back to us soon. She is on a university campus, so they do have university Wi-Fi, and hopefully she'll be back in anytime soon. Could just be a laptop problem. Mine crashed earlier today during a meeting, which was very annoying.
Looks like she's left to try to rejoin, so hopefully that will work.
Yeah. Good job that we're here as co-hosts, I guess, Julian, because the meeting is still going, so that's good. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, yes, we are at least here for that, although I can't add anything to the content or conceptual angle of the talk. So Yeah, hopefully she'll bounce back in soon.
Yeah. If
She's
anybody's,
at Glasgow today.
yes, yeah,
Ah,
yeah. But she is on the uni campus, so it is edgy rumor.
yeah.
So it should be decent internet, but who knows? If anybody's thought of any questions already, please do just type them in the chat because often it's easier to think of them as you go. Oh, she's back. Um,
Yeah.
I've been making notes and taking a few, but if you have questions, please do them in the chat. Anna, we lost you.
Great. Yes. Okay. Did you lose me? Let's figure out where you lost me. I realized because the little bar went away, but I don't know where it was.
Taxonomies and how to use the humanitarian. The last bit I heard was humanitarian framework principles.
Okay, like the coding. I'll show you some
Yeah,
slides and
the
tell me
coding slide
which
was up.
one it
Yeah.
was, the coding stuff. Okay, so let me share screen again. Good. Okay, that might happen again. So it just disconnected me. I'm on the edge room instead of like a stable internet, so it just disconnected me. Okay, so we're not there yet. Creating coding framework. We did this. Yes.
We might have been on the previous slide, I think, when
Maybe
you,
this one.
yeah, that one.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, so basically lots of very like distinct and kind of what we call disaggregated labels. So lots of details in order to be able to collectivize evidence. So you just lots and lots of detailed labels for things that don't exist in the existing database projects. And these are really important because you can't make legal cases or humanitarian interventions without more detail. And so this is just a basic kind of labeling system. And then also, like if you're doing traditional media studies, a basic kind of sourcing. So we were going to code the stuff that we were going to code. We had a sampling sheet. So this is the kind of inclusion criteria for the sampling. So we used newspapers, but it had to be sort of major reports in reputable papers. So papers that we know have good practices of verification. Humanitarian reports from, again, kind of major and well-respected organizations, legal or government action resulting from events. So in the cases where there were things like parliamentary inquiries and police reports themselves were used. And then we haven't really ended up using the social media sources because it's kind of complicated to pull that in, but that is a possibility and a practice that some people use in order to kind of add extra layers. And forensic architecture does some really interesting work pulling in social media to these other kinds of evidence gathering practices. And that's where we get into starting to experiment with using AI and LM. So we decided to have a little play with Notebook LM, which is sort of being marketed, and some people on here might use it. So it's sort of being marketed as a way to like pull different PDFs or notes that you have together, and then it does mind mapping and summarizing and answers questions for you. So you're kind of interrogating a small pool of research papers or of notes that you've taken in lectures or of news articles of something, right? So it's a way of it's not necessarily intended to be a way of structuring unstructured data, but it can be manipulated to structure unstructured data. So if you have lots and lots and lots of different reports that are reporting different kinds of numbers, you can ask it to generate and collect and aggregate those numbers. So it's the kind of work that you could do if you had a computer scientist on your team and many months and lots of money, and you were going to write a bunch of script to do it, though now you could probably get ChatGPT to write the script for you, but you would still need someone to actually take that script and use it. And so this was a way of doing some of that work using a visual interface and without needing to have kind of coders on call. And so the idea of this is like, what are we capable of doing with this kind of tool that we wouldn't be able to do if we were using without it, right? That would just take too long. And we have actually done a version of this project analog where we had like a hack day and we had like 6 people and they read reports and we coded things. But that's what you need. You need like a whole team to do it. So this is a way of speeding up that and making cost effective that process. So we wanted to experiment with this because most of the organizations that we work with and that do humanitarian work do not have a lot of time or resources. So we're looking for ways that these new technologies can be used by kind of resourcing time-strapped organizations. So if you've not seen Google LM, it changes a lot, but these screenshots are probably a little dated already. But this is basically, you upload different kinds of sources into it. We use PDFs as one of my mantras. You always make a PDF and always use a PDF. One, because it, sources on the web change, and so it's always good to have an archived version of it. And two, now with AI, the tech that LLMs work with are much better at reading PDFs than they are at reading HTML. So you're better off translating websites and things into PDFs and then using the PDFs for if you're working with an LM. So PDFs are our friends. Lots of PDFs go in for each of the different case studies we were looking at. And then what we did, and this is where content analysis turns into kind of AI something, whatever these new methods are going to be called, where what we do is we take the coding sheet. So I've just hidden all the normal layers that you would find in a coding sheet. And we've added our prompt question for the LLM and then notes on whether or not it worked and what we need to consider if you are prompting it. So this is what we would propose as kind of best practice, is recording in the same way that we would use intercoder reliability if we were doing content analysis, that we're doing the same thing, but thinking about it in relation to how we interact with the LM. So this should all be documented, and it should all be verified by at least 2 people, and it should all just be transparent with what you did and what worked and what didn't, because that's how you learn about the method, and we learn about this as we start to integrate it into our research. So this is just some examples of what this testing looked like. So we would ask it a question about ambient noise based on the questions that you saw on the last sheet, and then these are just some examples of what it would output. And so you see, you get quite a comprehensive response with a lot of detail in it. And also, one of the benefits of the LM, though there's still some problems with it, because it references, and not only references, it shows you through the hyperlink exactly where in the text it's pulling. So as academics, this is great. It doesn't do a good job of then letting you say download or capture that reference. So it's a step away from it's a few versions away from being really useful, but the fact that it can do it is better than what we currently have with some other of these kinds of AI interactive chats. So one of the things that we found that it was really good at, which is important if you are trying to turn unstructured data, so lots of different varied reports, into a set of numbers or a table, is that it is really good at generating tables and really pretty good at counting things. So we started using these prompts, asking it to produce tables from the data, and that was able to give us some really nice kind of overviews of the different kinds of munitions that were being used, and where we had this, things that were a little bit easier easier for it to count or to pull. So we tested these prompts on a subset of 8 articles, and we kind of listed what worked well and kind of the ways that this was useful. Just move this box that is over my writing. We found that the AI was able to expand from the examples and extrapolate to similar objects and tactics. So that was kind of useful. You just needed to keep an eye on it and kind of dialogue with it, make sure that what it was expanding to was what you were looking for. The responses often provided contextual information on the limits of the available information. So this was also useful. So there's been some coding for that kind of responsibility into the AI, and I would say much better on Google LM than on ChatGPT. So it will tell you, I can't actually give you an accurate answer for that because la, 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 la. And it was particularly useful, this ability to kind of classify things. So this it was quite interesting for us, and I'll get into this more at the very end. But this is an example of one of the tables that are generated of all the different kinds of weapons that are being used. So if you think, we just tested this on 8 articles. If you were going to test that on 8 articles on one particular protest, if built larger, you could scale this up, and then you could be feeding in lots of things and then be asking it. So if we were able to use the data that exists in like the ACLED database and then plug in the LM to that, and then ask it these questions with these detailed codes, in theory, it should be able to produce something like this on a much, much larger set of data. Not this interface in its instance, but the if you were to build your own kind of APIs using this technology, which we are doing for our other project that's also playing with Notebook LM. And so two of the things that we're using here that are actually very common for researchers to use is keyword extraction. So LMs are really good at keyword extraction. So that means you know what word you're telling it to look for, and then it's just looking for match cases or similar cases to that word. It's very good at that. It also is getting better and is pretty good at thematic analysis. So where you have a kind of broader theme. So that's, of course, really interesting for people who are doing qualitative work on lots and lots of transcripts that want to code their transcripts into thematic analysis, because you could use an LM to put all your transcripts in. It's basically what Navivo does, but in a kind of simplified interface. So you put all your transcripts in there and you ask it to start looking for themes, to generate themes, to code for themes. So on the referencing, and so that what are some of the issues? One of the things, of course, we talk about a lot with AI are hallucinations and validation. So when the LM or the AI acts as if it's telling you truth, but it's not telling you truth, but it sounds like truth. We didn't have loads of that with this LM, and in part that's because it's so the way the LM works is it goes through the documents you give it first, and then when it needs kind of help or a broader framework, it then uses the kind of larger LLM system that Google's AI stuff is built around. So because it goes through your references first, or attempts to, then it's citing most of the things that it's spitting back to you. So you have a better ability to look for misinformation than you would with other kinds of current chat-based AI. But there's this issue where the sources don't stay attached. So you literally have to click on the reference and then screenshot the reference to be able to archive it, which is obviously not like a good practice, right? We don't want that. So it also struggled with some kinds of nuances that we were hoping to record. So it wasn't able to necessarily understand different types of violence, which makes sense because that's a very human, very qualitative kind of concept. If we wanted to code it to do that, and there's been a wonderful research paper out on this, we would kind of need to be able to give it what's called negative prompts. So we'd need to say this, but not this over and over again to it in like a bunch of different ways so that it would learn. We basically would need to teach it to train it. So it would take longer and require more than what you can do in the existing interface. But it is technically it is possible. And we will soon see iterations and people will start to use this more. So sometimes it would also return different answers if you asked it the same question different times. And a lot of people have reported that in their work with playing around with these tools. So in some ways that's a good thing because you can use it to verify itself, but it also means you probably want to almost force it to do that to make sure that it's kind of giving you factually the same answer if you ask it the same question at different times. So it might be that we need to introduce a new kind of reliability when we're working with AI tools, where it's like not just inter-person reliability, but also like machine reliability, or kind of 2 testing dates and seeing if it does the same thing on the 2 days. So there's various kind of ethical things that I think are worth considering there. Yeah, we talked about that. So we also used human verification practices, which is, of course, very important when working with AI. And so what we did is a data diary. So this is common practice in data journalism, where you record your kind of reflections as you go with what you're finding and how you do it, just in first person as a kind of like researcher's diary as you're going. So we think that's quite important. And then we also wanted to be able to have a way of recording this process. So making sure that we were capturing all of these different layers of what we were doing, because we're at this moment where there aren't rules. When we do have rules about AI, the rules we have so far about AI are like, you're not allowed to use it, or like, you should be very afraid. We don't really have a good sets of productive guides or guides of best practice yet. Like those are literally in creation as we go, and new things are coming out kind of every week where people are trying to like put some of this stuff together. So this is kind of in the idea that we should be recording and sharing our attempts at doing this. So what we did is we created just a Google form, and not suggesting that everyone should use Google Forms. Just the idea is that you create some kind of form that allows you to do your database entry on, and that form has both qualitative and both places where you're putting the data that the LLM gave you, but then you're also able to put reflections into that. And so we are recording here the LLM, what the LLM responds, and then we are also recording things like, let's see if I can find a good example. Any of the issues that the researcher found. So we're doing the kind of we're archiving and we're documenting and we're using as research both what the LLM is producing in terms of the database capture, but then also what the researcher is finding in the interactions with the LLM. There you have some of these are like quantifiable, so some of them are like, how accurate is this? And then you tick a box, and then others are qualitative like this. So that's an example of what I mean here. So we're recording these human processes. And so thinking about how we can create methodology that is not just machine generated and now the AI is doing it for us. And we have a little paragraph in our paper that says, oh, by the way, we used AI, maybe it's inaccurate sometimes. We don't want that, right? We're still humanities-ish social scientists. So we don't want that. We want a much richer sense of the human and the researcher as the human, and what that role is and what that interactivity is between the researcher and the machine. And so I've been thinking about this a little bit, drawing off the work of Donna Haraway, who, back in the 1980s, when she was thinking about things like nuclear technologies and internet technologies, technologies that now seem old to us, though they are not that old. And she would talk about this idea of a dance that would happen between the human and the machine, or the human and the cyborg. And I think this is a really interesting concept for where we're at right now. So that rather than seeing the machine as something like out to get us or that will destroy us, and likewise, rather than see the machine as something that will, gloriously replace us and do all the wonderful things that we want it to do, that actually what we are in is this kind of spiral dance where we are interacting with the machine, and we don't lose sight of the fact that we create the machine, that we can manipulate the machine, that we can redesign the machine, but that the machine is also going to impact us in the way that we work. And so thinking about this as a form of a kind of dance. So some of the kind of things that are kind of the bigger kind of conceptual takeaways of this project, and what I'm currently calling a dancing with robots approach, is that we should adapt to technological limitations. And so thinking about what it's possible, recording it, making sure that we're suggesting potential improvements, keeping prototype and experimental mindset as we're going. And really important to remember, I mean, we're very lucky to be on a project where we can literally feedback to, Google software engineers. But that we always have that capacity, like the research that we do can go and inform, what actual people who are building these tools do. So not losing sight of that. That talking is also a form of training. And so when we share these kinds of practices of our experimental work, we are also kind of training each other and learning from each other. And that there's this importance to putting the reflections that we have on database processes into the actual, in this case, the database itself, but into our research itself, so that it's not just, I have the machine do it and then I write a limitations paragraph, that it's actually woven into the methodology, that when we're using the machine, we are also talking back to the machine and reflecting on the machine and thinking about how that the role of it and how it's shaping us and how it's shaping our data and our research. And kind of holding on to this idea that just is kind of a modernized version of what we say about bad data is better than no data. And I would say that bad AI data is also often better than no data. And I think there are many, many, many things to rightfully be concerned about with AI technologies. I also want to see more citizen data initiatives. I want to see people play with this stuff and use this stuff and see how they can empower themselves, how they can advocate for themselves by learning how to use these tools for different kinds of data projects. there's all sorts of ways. I mean, in the same ways that we saw citizen science and citizen journalism expand, we're at a moment where AI technologies can be integrated into those same kinds of movements. So just to wrap up, so the two key takeaways that I would say for using if you want to playing with either Google's Notebook LM or other of these kinds of LM is drawing here off of the Meet the Universe Halfway book, Meet Your LLM Halfway. So use these kinds of techniques that LMs are good at. So kind of make it, if you want to get more out of it, then train it, use prompts that are useful for it to be able to read, and then and again, for me, I like using this kind of spiral dance metaphor. So it's like, okay, I inputted this, it gave me this, that's not exactly what I wanted, I input this, okay, we see this, I ask it why it's not able to do that, it tells me something useful, I use that to reprompt it, so that you're having a kind of dialogue with the chat. And then these are 4 things that LMs are good at. So thinking about how you can phrase your questions, your prompts in relation to these. And then this is a wonderful from Code Academy, I think, just like a really nice model for how to mitigate hallucinations. And so incorporating these into our practices as we, or if we are going to be working more with AI technologies. And I think it's great to see people building and developing other kinds of, guides like this to help people do their work. So that's kind of where we are and what we're working at. And I'm, very open to questions on this project, and also really interested to hear people's ideas or any other ways that people are using or playing around with these technologies for their projects, even if those projects are like radically different from this project, because I think that's what I creating these spaces where we can just talk about how we're experimenting with this stuff, I think is really important. So yeah.
Thank you, Anna. You've unshared your screen. So we have a couple of different ways people can ask questions. You can obviously type them into the chat. I can't see any there at the moment. Or you can, given that there's not that many of us in the room, a few more came in while Anna was talking, you can just raise a hand if you have a question and ask it directly to Anna. So if anybody has any questions, please ask now. Julian, you did let us know that you were going to have to leave, so thank you for your attendance. Can't see any hands right now, but I have questions because of course I have questions. So Anna, just going back to the beginning, where you were talking about kind of ideally accessing primary reports of the incidents that had happened.
Yeah.
Is there any issues with trying to access those? Are people willing to share them, or is that something?
Well, most of those will be things in the public domain. So everything that we used is in the public domain already. So there'll be reports that are published on the websites of the of the organizations, or the parliamentary stuff is easy to get. There will be projects where, and like Kaylin's PhD is a really good example of this, like where you kind of have to do FOI, Freedom of Information requests, to get the documents that you might need. But yeah, the idea, like you could feed anything into this. I mean, then you get into that question of like, for us, it kind of, I don't want to say bypasses the ethical question, but it makes it easier to be feeding things into the AI when those things are already in the public domain. So like if the people that were programming the LLM wanted to scrape that information and put it into they could do it anyway. Like they don't, we're not facilitating that project anymore. Whereas if you're starting to like use FOI documents, or you're using any kind of private documents, and there's not a privacy setting on the LM that you're using, then you're feeding, right? This is just one of the things that academics are concerned about. It's like that you're then feeding that private data. And this is why I think it's also like slightly different if you're thinking about using it for something like transcripts from interviews, because then unless you have a privacy setting set on your LM or whatever software you're using, you're giving personal information to you're giving away people's data. So like that's why we still have a lot of ethical boundaries around that, even though the software we do use, like Navivo, which is totally allowed, is using the same backend types of technology as these newer tools are. So it's kind of broad answer to that. But yeah, I think it's worth thinking about it on a project specific level, and then thinking about like, is this public or private information, and where does it already exist? Which would be the same for any kind of thing we were doing where we're producing text.
Yeah, okay. Has anybody thought of any questions in the meantime?
Yeah, I guess hi. I missed the beginning, but I think maybe I didn't say this. I'm always curious about how we, when we put our work, let's say our intellectual work into these large language models, I was thinking the other day, for so many decades, we've been trying to protect our intellectual property and work, but now we kind of share it with this huge we don't share all of it, but I'm really curious about how you think, what your thoughts are about that, how you feel about that.
Yeah, I have a few different thoughts. I was just talking to my friend whose office I'm in about this last night, and we were talking about like, so right, there's been a big push, and actually if you're on UKR funded projects, you now you're only allowed to publish open source, right? Or open access. So we've had a push in the last few years to make everything that we do open access. If something's open access, there's no reason why, like to my understanding, there's no reason why an LLM couldn't be trained on it. And we also are seeing all the major Taylor and Francis, all the major, Cambridge publishers making deals with AI companies to give over their databases of text, right? And I think that, I guess my question is, what are we protecting, and why, and what are we protecting it from? So if we want the AI tools to be have better information and have better evidence, why wouldn't we want research to be on it, right? Like, why wouldn't we want more verified and validated and evidence-based work to be part of the training model rather than Reddit subthreads, right? Like, it seems like there would actually be an academic incentive to have, like, I would rather no Reddit subthread, right? And only peer reviewed. Actually, I had a lot of Reddit subthreads are great, so I would modify that statement. But so I think there's a really important bigger question there about like, well, what is the purpose of academic knowledge, and where does it belong, and who's it belong to? I think the fear that giant corporations are the ones who are building the models, and whose interests are they building them in, and how are they, in the same way that we worry about what algorithms on social media show us, I think we should be worried about how LLM technologies are prioritized different ways of speaking and sifting through language. And those are design questions, right? And when the designers work for these massive corporations, and when designers are from a homogenous group with certain kinds of values that maybe don't represent everybody's values, those are things to be concerned about, as with any technological design. So that I think that's a kind of like, who are you giving it to me is the important question. And what kinds of power do the real people, not the machine, right? Who are the real people involved in this network, and what kinds of power do they have, and why do or don't we want them to have certain things that we produce? And then what is the incentive to either keep our work private or to make it public? So I think, for me, and I've been open data person, so this has always been my answer at every stage of technological development that I've been an academic for. I would rather take part in this world of technological advancement and risk the bad things happening to my work by it being public, than not engage with it and basically take my own voice away, right? Which is sometimes, saying no is also a form of activism, right? So disengagement. I think disengagement can be a powerful tool, but it's not the tool that I'm interested in using when it comes to these kinds of technological developments.
Yeah, thank you. I guess the corporations are the big issue. If it weren't for for the wrong design, then it would all be great, right? But thanks, that's really interesting.
Yeah, or like if right, and like we say that all the time, like we don't like we're not doing this because we like want Google to get better. We want people to make better open source tools that are, that people can use. And I think we're going to see, right? There's all this money floating around for developing AI tools. We're going to see research-based initiatives where people are making these, and the problem is they cost a lot of money to run. And if you don't have corporate money, you need public money. And if you don't have, and so, right, it's the same political economy capitalist problem that we have for anything that we try to build outside of the global corporate structure of the world. So I think we will see really cool stuff in the same way people have tried to build alternative social media. I think we will see people try to build all kinds of alternative, and some people are already doing it, right? Some of them already exist. It's whether or not they'll be able to scale and provide the service. Like, why do we choose Google now over Pirate Pad or whatever, right? So like we always get sucked back into the corporate tools because they work better, because so I think it's got the same political questions to me as all these other kinds of tech issues do.
Yeah.
So we've got a question in the chat, Hannah, for you, from Wang. So saying, "Hi, amazing speech, thank you. Do you also analyze photographic data in this way, or do you have any recommended way to deal with photo data?"
Oh, I don't know if the LM takes photos. Yeah, I think you can upload videos, so it must be able to do something. I haven't played with it. I think it's worth. And if you're comfortable with the ethical stuff that we've been talking about, like I think it's worth having a play with it. And again, my kind of ethical guidance would be use things that are already in the public domain when you are playing with these things. But it should. I know that there were, so like before we called it AI, there have been a number of machine learning projects that have tried to do things with photographic data, and they're I was a part of a project a few years ago that was with forensic architecture, and people were trying to build like a prototype that would be able to like identify humanitarian issues from YouTube videos, but the kind of detail that you needed to read out of the video image is so technical and so detailed that like our existing models for how we identify photos are kind of not quite powerful enough. And then also you need like the training data set, and you need like a person who knows exactly how to differentiate like this canister from that canister, or this type of gun from that type of gun. So, and then you think about the quality of the kind of video recordings that you're usually working with. So it's one of those things where it's like theoretically possible, but technically the image verification systems that we have aren't quite good enough. But of course, AI is speeding up the ability and the nuance of that kind of classical classification machine learning. So we will see advancements across those fields in the coming years.
So maybe one for the future then.
Yeah, I think even a few years future we'll see more. And also we're gonna have all these policy wars, right, around this stuff that are also coming. So like who knows what? We're gonna be in this mess for a while, I think, of like what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing, how and the speed, we're not gonna be able to keep up with the speed of it, right? So it's just, I think we're gonna see something similar to we've seen with other kinds of technological emergences over the last 40 years.
Great. Does anybody else have any more questions? I'm conscious that we are kind of coming up towards the end of our allotted hour. So we may just, if nobody's got any more questions, finish there. But I will just let you know that we are about to take a break from seminars over the Easter holidays. So we don't have any seminars for the next 3 weeks. And then our next seminar is on the 30th of April with Davina Frau-Meigs, who's going to be talking about when media and information literacy meets AI and design considerations for that. So you can see that it's a sensible follow-on talk from this.
Yeah, that sounds great.
And we'll have then weekly seminars all the way up to the 14th of May, and then we actually have an event on the 21st of May as well that we'll send details around for very soon.
Right. All right. Thank you guys for coming. Have a lovely, I think it's sunny down there. It's sunny up here, so it's probably sunny down there, or wherever you're joining from, after the rest of your day.
Thank you.
And I'll stop the recording now.